Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to our Get Astrologic Now YouTube channel. And today I want to talk about the news. What's really been in the news lately is all the conflict, the fighting, and particularly this recent array of airplane crashes we've had. But more specifically, the one that's on the news is this horrific airplane crash of Flight 17, Malaysian Flight 17, that took off from Amsterdam, Holland, and of course we all know it was shot down. So we know the cause of this crash, unlike the other Malaysian flight that took off March 8th, and it's still unknown. I want to talk about the variables in the chart, not because we want to dwell on morbid, terrible events, but we want to understand astrology better, how to make predictions, what is happening in the charts of these event charts that are causing such terrible events to happen, what causes such crisis, calamity, and destruction in a chart. And we can better understand this to help possibly prevent or to forewarn us for future events, because I do believe astrology is a tool to help us understand and direct and make plans for our future. So with that, to really try to understand what was going on in these charts, I know from the Malaysian chart, the flight that took off on March 8th, this was 2014. Of course, this is the one that disappeared, and we have no idea to this day what has happened to this airplane. On that day, Neptune was exactly the degree of what we call the IC or the nadir in a chart, which is the very bottom of a chart. And this is the mystery. This is like the unknown. This is the fourth house. If you were born at midnight, you have the sun in the fourth house. The nadir is the darkest point. So I believe we will never know what happened with that airplane just because of that. And Neptune does represent the ocean. So therefore we know that it probably crashed into the ocean. But most importantly in that chart, Mars was the ruler of the chart by Scorpio being on the ascendant. And Mars is in the 12th house with Rahu and Saturn during that time. And then soon after that, Mars stationed to go retrograde. This was around March, let's see, I think it was the 1st or the 2nd that Mars turned to go retrograde. And so it was in the 12th house with Saturn and Rahu. And it's aspecting the 6th house. By opposition, the 6th house rules accidents. So you can see that this was a very volatile chart. K2, which is the planet of terrorism, it represents terrorism, was in the 6th house of accidents. So just to look at what was going on in this more recent airplane crash, which happened taking off from Amsterdam, the time I have for this was July 17th, 2014, and the time I found was 6:15 p.m. Amsterdam, Holland. So with that, again, we have Scorpio on the ascendant. Now, Mars, the ruler of Scorpio, goes to the 12th house again, which is the house of hidden enemies, okay? And it is conjunct Saturn. The interesting thing, I believe, is the degree markings where Mars went retrograde around the time in March. It was around the same degrees that Mars has returned in its process of going direct. So Mars at this time was around 1 degree of Libra at the time of this fatal airplane crash or shooting. And it was 1 degree at this time, and it was 3 degrees when it stationed to go retrograde. So around a 3-degree orb, we will always find that these events happen when planets cross over a stationing degree. Now, looking further at this chart, with Scorpio ascendant, this puts the moon in Pisces during that day, very close to planet Uranus, which can represent accidents, unforeseen, unexpected. And also they are all in the same sign with K2. K2 is unforeseen accidents and terrorism. Once again, so we have K2, Uranus, and Moon. and they are in the 5th house. But if you look at Chandra Lagna, looking at the moon as the ascendant, you will notice that the Saturn Mars that are in Libra in the 12th house happen to go to the 8th house from the natal moon in this chart. And furthermore, to look at more instances that involve death or difficulty, we want to look at the 8th house. And in this 8th house, we have Venus and Mercury in the sign of Gemini. And I noticed that Mercury was in the nakshatra Ardra, which represents the teardrop in sadness. And it is the ruler of the 8th house in the 8th house of death, conjunct Venus, which is, by the way, the dispositor planet of Mars and Saturn, because Mars and Saturn are in the sign of Libra. Libra's ruled by Venus, so their dispositor going to the 8th house. This is a very treacherous chart. But what makes this chart so different from other airplanes that took off on this day close to this time? That boils down to the very specific predictive tools that we have in Vedic astrology, and that is the divisional houses. So when I look to the Navamsha, the divisional charts in Navamsha, which is D9, this chart should always be compared with the birth chart because it's so specific for details, and it's the fruit of the chart. What will evolve out of a birth chart is seen in the Navamsha. I pull up the Navamsha chart, and here we have Mars in Libra, because Mars is so strong in the early degrees of Libra that it stays in the same sign. It's for Gautama, and it is opposing Saturn. And Saturn right now is in its debilitation sign of Aries in the Navamsha currently. So once again, we have this malefic energy of Mars and Saturn. So I took it upon myself to go even deeper to the chart that deals with conveyances and cars and vehicles, which is the D16 chart, which is the show Dasamsha. And in this chart, we have Mars once again in Aries, or opposing its, where there's Libra-Aries axes. So Mars is in Aries, conjunct the Sun, and Saturn, once again, is debilitated in Aries. So you're seeing that the culprit really is involved with this Mars and Saturn aspect that is so harsh and deep. And one more division that takes it even deeper, called the Trimsumsha chart, which is the D30 chart. So we're talking about getting close to getting down to the minute to make these predictions. And in this chart, we have Mars in Aries. Once again, this is a really harsh aspect for Mars to be in Aries. And you analyze where these planets go in these divisional charts. And I find that it's a very useful tool to take them from the divisions, because this is where Mars is in this chart of danger. Misfortune is what the Trimsumsha chart is about. And you place it back into the birth chart. This is a technique I find that's amazing for prediction. And so when I take Mars and place it back into the birth chart of this event, we find that Mars ends up in the 6th house of this chart with Scorpio ascendant of the time that this airplane first took off at 6:15 on July 17th of 2014. So this is a little taste of how you can really look at prediction using Vedic astrology and looking at events. Thank you for watching, and if you would like a personal reading, remember you can always go to my website, www.galacticcenter.org. Thank you.